Analysis on this, let's turn to Samuel Ramani. He's a PhD candidate and researcher over at Oxford University, where he joins me now live. Samuel, good to see you. You heard Simon, so I want to ask you the same thing. I mean, what do you make of the claim by the British Foreign Office that they've exposed a plan that indicates the Kremlin is trying to install a pro-Russian leadership in Kiev?
Well, I think that it's not surprising that Russia would ultimately be trying to change the regime inside Ukraine. I think one of the primary goals of the 2014 annexation of Crimea and subsequent takeovers of Donetsk, Luhansk, and push towards eastern Ukraine was aimed at changing the political order in Kiev away from the Euromaidan revolution. So this idea is not surprising, but the report is thin on very specific evidence of how this plot might actually be undertaken.
Okay. The U.S. has just shipped in a $200 million military aid package, but Germany, as we know, has blocked Estonia from sending sort of German-made weaponry over to Ukraine. I mean, are we starting to see cracks in the West's approach to Ukraine?
Well, it seems as if Germany is very much the outlier over here. Germany seems to be pushing a lot more for dialogue with Russia as the means of de-escalation rather than combining dialogue and deterrence, which seems to be the preferred approach of the United States and even the United Kingdom. And it's also important to keep in mind that Germany's soft stance towards Russia is facing pushback within Ukraine. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba admired Germany's support for Ukraine in 2014, but also criticized their slow response now. And the German Navy chief, who called for closer ties with Russia as a means of containing China, had to resign yesterday. So I think that internal divisions in Germany might push their policy closer to what we're seeing from other European and Western countries.
Speaking of dialogue, we've heard from the Kremlin that Ukraine never, ever become a member of NATO. The U.S. insisting that they're not going to change the open door policy of the alliance. I mean, at the end of the day, isn't this a decision that needs to be made by Ukraine? Why haven't we heard from them? And is there silence, some sort of tacit approval?
Well, I think it's just very unlikely that Ukraine is going to join NATO, period. I mean, Germany admitted such in June of 2021. Spain just admitted it yesterday. And Joe Biden did so at his press conference. And that's because European countries, in particular France and Germany, are unwilling to take on the security guarantees and the security role that would be required to protect Ukraine from Russian aggression. They're happy sending defensive weapons or anti-tank missile systems, but they're not willing to put boots on the ground to fight Russia. So I think that this Russian fear-mongering about Ukraine joining NATO is more rhetoric and hyperbole than based in actual facts.
Okay. Coming back to sort of the top line in this story, the news from the British Foreign Office. I mean, how concerned are the British or other Western countries of a possible invasion? We talked about them not putting boots on the ground, but in terms of an invasion?
Well, there's really three scenarios that Russia could pursue. One could be continued brinkmanship, which is keeping the 100,000 troops on the border and maybe engaging in limited incursions inside East Donbass and eastern Ukraine in the hopes that the Russians can get concessions about Ukrainian NATO membership and Georgian NATO membership, which may not actually be substantive, but would actually be good for Putin's image at home. Another option is that Russia decides to destabilize Ukraine rather than invade it. And that's the view of Ukraine's National Security Advisor and Security Council. And that could consist of cyber attacks and economic warfare. And the third, and least likely outcome, in my view, is an outright invasion, which leads to a push for Kiev and a regime change. So the top line report is dealing with a contingency that's most likely to happen under the least likely scenario of invasion, or at best, the second scenario of destabilization, but most likely invasion.
That's some very good points and analysis there. Thank you very much. Samuel Ramani, live for us from the UK. Thank you.